So I'm looking at two different books that are both on like Usul al-Tafsir and al-Tafseer, and they both kind of focus on the same figures, but these two books are like really different from each other. So the first one is Minhaj al-Razi fi Tafsir bain al-Manahij al-Mu'asiri. So it's basically comparing Fakhruddin al-Razi with his contemporaries in Tafsir. And the author is Dr. Ibrahim Abdurrahman, but then it's edited and revised by Yusuf Hassan Naufal. And it's not really clear who's writing what exactly in the book. So I don't know what to attribute to who, which I found kind of problematic.
So what is the title in Arabic?
Yeah, it says Minhaj.
No, I mean, what did Naufal do?
It just says, let's see here. Raja' or Taqdeem.
No, so the author is the first one.
Okay.
So it's like he revised it and he wrote an introduction.
So what does that mean, revise?
Yeah, he read the manuscript.
Just,
He revised the tashkil, he revised something.
I see.
It's not edited it in the way we.
I see. Okay. So I looked up Dr. Muhammad Ibrahim Abdurrahman. He's a professor at Ain Shams University in the Department of Tarbiyah. And he admits that a lot of studies have been done on Fakhruddin Razi, but he feels that they do not fully unveil his academic personality. And he states that usually these previous studies have focused on one aspect of al-Razi's exegesis, such as his language, grammar, or rhetoric. So this is, by the way, this is from 1989. And he says he's more concerned with capturing the larger picture of al-Razi and putting it in historical context. And he compares the methodology or intellectual basis for each author's exegesis after first giving like some historical, biographical background on each author. And he looks at like where each Mufassir got their sources from and how they use those sources. And so he compares Fakhruddin al-Razi to Ibn Atiyah, Ibn al-Jawzi, Ibn al-Bukhar, and Ibn al-Arabi. And the other book I have right here is al-Muharrar al-Wajiz fi Ibn Atiyah wa Zad al-Masir fi al-Tafsir from Ibn al-Jawzi. And so this is comparing Ibn Atiyah and Ibn al-Jawzi only. So it doesn't have any discussion of Fakhruddin al-Razi. And you can see like this book is quite small compared to this one. So this one isn't very detailed, except with Fakhruddin al-Razi. The other people it just kind of mentions very small and then moves on. And this one is detailed. And this one was published in 2009. And the author is Mansour bin Fadl al-Kafi. And so he is comparing Ibn Atiyah and Ibn al-Jawzi and gives a brief introduction explaining the importance of his research and his methodology. And he aimed through this research to become more fully acquainted with the apparent and most important features that the two exegetes adhered to. And he wanted to draw out their underlying principles and theory regarding exegesis and show you academic examples. And he also wanted to compare how they brought jurisprudence into their exegesis, especially since one of them was Maliki and the other was Hanbali. And he states that the academic acceptability of doing this is by putting forward a comparison of the different rulings found in their exegesis and bringing into view the preeminence of these rulings. And Dr. Mansour wanted to explain the points of agreement and difference between the two exegetes in regards to judicial rulings and the traditional sciences of the Quran. And he states in his introduction that nobody has done this type of research before him, stating that there's only one doctoral dissertation produced on the methodology of Ibn Atiyah and only one master's thesis. And he's only aware of one study done on Ibn al-Jawzi's exegesis, which is a master's thesis. So he doesn't seem to be aware of this book, which I found kind of interesting. He goes on to say that his work comparing the two exegetes is the first ever done, and he proceeds to give an introduction explaining the biographies of Ibn Atiyah and Ibn al-Jawzi in the historical context, and then explains who inspired them or who their sources was, and he goes subject by subject showing their similarities and differences. And just to give you a taste about this book, when I was reading this book, one thing that I found kind of interesting is that he will cite classical, like tabaqat or tarajim literature without questioning them at all. He doesn't have any discussion as to about their veracity, or if it's okay to use that or anything like that. And he'll often kind of use like a statistical reasoning with them, where he will say, most of them say this. So I found that kind of different, kind of interesting. And he says that Fakhruddin al-Razi's family was from Tabaristan, but he was born in Ray, and he is descended from the Tamimi tribe and a descendant of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. And he is called the Imam of his lifetime. He was called Shaykh al-Islam, Razi, and Fakhruddin. And narrated by most of the Tarajim literature, he was known as Ibn Khatib and Khatib Ray. He was also known as Abu Fadl, Abu Abdullah, but he's most famously known as Fakhruddin al-Razi, or just Fakhr al-Razi. And he has a large amount of kunyas, and previous researchers said that is because he just had such a high position in Islamic knowledge. But he disagrees with most other academics about Razi's birth date, based on evidence that he found in Razi's Tafsir itself. So he thinks that he was born in 543 instead of 544. And he says most sources say that Fakhruddin Razi died in 606 Hijrah on Eid al-Fitr in Herat. And he says that most of the Tarajim literature traces his death at the hands of his enemies, the Karramiyya, who were like a anthropomorphist break-off from the Athari creed. So they were kind of like extremist Hanbalites in their Aqidah. They believed that God had a body completely, and so they were marginalized by all the other groups and were basically ran off to Khorasan and were troublemakers. So Fakhruddin Razi, I guess, wrote a lot of stuff against them, and eventually they killed him because of it.
Yeah, he wrote Ta'sis and Taqdis.
And then he doesn't mention a lot about Ibn Atiyah and al-Jawzi, but he just says Ibn Atiyah is from Granada. His lineage is Arab. His kunya is Abu Muhammad. He was born in 481 and died in 541 in Granada. Ibn al-Jawzi is also a descendant of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq from the Tamimi tribe, and was born in 510 Hijrah, died in 567, and he was born in Baghdad. So you can see it's a lot more on Fakhruddin Razi than just a little bit on the other people. He moves on pretty quickly. And then I skipped ahead to his section on fiqh, because that's what I'm more interested in. And I'm trying to compare these two books on how they approach the tafsir and fiqh. And so before getting into any comparison about any of the figures with fiqh, he wants to give a big discussion as to what fiqh is. So he assumes the audience doesn't know anything about fiqh at all. Like, it's really kind of funny in a way. So he quotes Ibn Khaldun from the Muqaddimah, and it says, fiqh is knowledge of the rulings of God the Exalted regarding deeds of those morally responsible, which are mandatory and care for the recommended, disliked, and neutral. And it is what is received from the Quran and Sunnah, and what is established by the lawgiver to know it from evidence. Then he has a discussion on like istikhraj, istinbat, and adla, some usul fiqh stuff. And he mentions how the rulings of Sharia, most of them came down during the time of Medina. And he stresses how the Sharia is pertinent to all aspects of human life, and every action fits either into halal, haram, makruh, or wajib. And then he just starts like quoting this guy, Sheikh Muhammad Abu Zahra. So he's like expecting the readers to know who this is. I didn't find any discussion in the book yet as to who this guy is supposed to be. So I just Googled the name, and I guess he's a big scholar in Islamic law that taught at the University of Cairo. And he goes on to say that Fakhruddin al-Razi was a mujtahid in the Shafi'i madhab, and he did tarjih a lot. He selected between the different opinions in the madhab and decided which one was stronger or weaker. And he was known sometimes for choosing Hanafi or Maliki opinions, but he never chose anything from the Hanbali madhab as they were considered marginal in his time. And he was known for giving hadith precedence in his fiqh, although Razi was not known as a muhaddith, which I found a little weird. How is he mujtahid but not a muhaddith? I don't know what he exactly meant by that. And I could tell by reading it that this person is very much, seems to have Salafi leanings, and that's kind of a bias that shows in every person he discusses. He makes them seem like Salafi, I guess you would say. So one of the things he says about Fakhruddin al-Razi is that he says فخر الرازي لم يكن في اعتناقه للمذهب الشافعي متعصبا ولم يكن مقلدا. So he's saying he's not like, I guess you would say, stubborn when it comes to the Shafi'i madhab, nor is he just kind of like a follower that doesn't know the underlying rulings behind, or reasons behind the rulings. So he's saying that he would often deviate and take opinion from other madhabs. And he also notes that Fakhruddin al-Razi wrote a book called al-Mahsul fi ilm Usul fiqh, in the field of Usul fiqh. And his sources of jurisprudence were the Quran, Sunnah, Ijma' and Qiyas. And he moves on to Ibn Atiyah, and he says that Ibn Atiyah was Maliki and gathered many opinions of the different Malikis in his Tafsir, often quoting from the Mudawwana. And one issue that is highlighted by the author is that Ibn Atiyah's Tafsir, during Surah al-Fatiha, he talks about the issue of saying Ameen during the prayer, and he says the opinion of the madhab is for the imam not to say Ameen, but for the congregation to say Ameen aloud, and he quotes that directly from the Mudawwana, saying that Imam Malik never said Ameen aloud. And he was not known to have asabiyah for his madhab, and known to take opinions from the other madhabs, which he also says about Ibn al-Jawzi. So, and he says that Ibn Atiyah was primarily a mufassir and secondarily a faqih. So he doesn't mention fiqh in his tafsir that much, and especially not usul fiqh. And as for Ibn al-Jawzi, he says that none of the tarajim or tabaqat literature mentions what madhab Ibn al-Jawzi adheres to, which I thought was really suspicious. But he says that if you read Ibn al-Jawzi's tafsir, it's pretty self-evident that he's Hanbali. And he also has no asabiyah for his madhab and chooses freely the opinions of other madhabs. And he says Ibn al-Jawzi does not include usul fiqh in his tafsir to make it easier to read. So that was kind of an interesting observation. And then when I went to this book, I found this book extremely different from this one in a lot of ways. So this one's from 1989, so it's pretty dated. You know, the Arabic looks dated and the conventions are different. Here he cites a lot of like source or primary literature directly, which I think indicates there's not a lot of secondary literature back then on the subject, whereas with this book, it pretty much only cites secondary literature. And so I saw that as a big kind of distinction. And this book has got really easy modern print, and it's set up very much like a Western book, so it has the table of contents in the front. It's got like Western style numbers and footnotes and everything. So it's very different stylistically. And it's much larger, much more detailed. I felt like that book didn't have very much citations in it, whereas this one's like meticulously cited, like every sentence has a footnote on it. So that was quite a bit different. I wasn't very impressed with that book. I was much more impressed with this book. And this one's from 2010. So I saw kind of like a big, I guess maybe you'd say, development in the field, but this person seems to be unaware of that person. So. And also with this book, I found the vocabulary a lot easier to work with. It's a lot more readable than the other book. But just to give you an example of kind of some of the detail that he goes into here, is he wants to start out giving you the context, historical context of Ibn Atiyah. So he tells you that he's born in Granada in 481, and he passed away in 541 or possibly 542. And he lived during the time of the Murabitun, during the reign of Yusuf bin Tashfin, and his son Ali bin Yusuf bin Tashfin, and his son Tashfin bin Ali bin Yusuf bin Tashfin. And he talks about the different centers of learning during the time, which were Cordoba, Granada, and Murcia, and that Ibn Atiyah was raised in Granada with the ulama there. So you can see it's quite a bit more detail than the other one, and that's basically it.